2,000. That's the number of serial killers that are on the loose hunting for fresh victims. We're not just making that number up. This statement was given by investigator Paul Holes, who nailed notorious Golden State Killer Joseph James DeAngelo in 2016 after a 40-year manhunt. That case may have been solved, but in this video, we bring you 3 active serial killers who are responsible for dozens of brutal murders, so stay tuned. Chicago killings. Gwendolyn Williams was a child of South Side Chicago. She was a fashionista, a dancer, and a fierce animal lover who adored homemade grits and cornbread. The 44-year-old was a protector, the eldest of 6 children raised by a single mother. In 2002, Williams was found dead, covered in blood behind a dollar store. She is one of 51 women whose bodies were dumped in abandoned homes, alleyways, and along highways across Chicago between 2001 and 2018. Roosevelt University journalism professor John Fountain vowed, "We've got to shine a light on this." A former New York Times national correspondent, John Fountain, assigned his students an ambitious project. The task was to tell the untold stories of the 51 women, all of whom were strangled or asphyxiated. The majority of victims were African Americans. Many were dismembered and discarded in trash cans or garbage bags. DNA samples were only obtained from 18 of 51 of the murdered women, none of which yielded a cross-match in the series of cold cases. The Murder Accountability Project first raised the red flag about the 51 deaths and said a pattern suggests a serial killer at work. According to the group, many of the slain women were prostitutes or drug addicts. Many have argued their stories have gone untold because the murdered women are mostly African American women. A person working the case took it a step further, saying, "We're America's most unwanted. No one really wants to hear our stories. 1, because we're black, and 2, because we're women." The heinous crimes appeared to stop in 2014, but recommenced in 2017 when 2 more women were murdered within 3 months. The police even formed a special task force working with the FBI to gather DNA samples from each murder to collect any information they deemed may help solve the crimes. But nothing has yet been solved, and no person has been charged yet, except one person who was convicted in Detroit in 1980 for armed robbery, and again in 2014 for check fraud. The suspect was again arrested in Tampa on a warrant of first-degree murder in Williams's case, but the state attorney's office reportedly decided not to extradite him. Even now, the hunt for this Chicago killer is ongoing, so stay safe. I-45 killings. As the bright lights of Houston fade away on the Interstate 45 highway, the towns get smaller and fewer, and civilization gives way to pastures and abandoned oil fields. The I-45 is a major artery connecting Houston with Galveston on Texas's Gulf Coast. But over the decades, this stretch of highway has taken on a more sinister use. It's become a dumping ground for serial killers. Since the 1970s, over 30 young women and girls have disappeared or been found murdered in the stretch of what some call the Highway of Hell. There are 11 1970s girls. The first one was found in Galveston in 1971. Her name was Brenda Jones. Then there are the 80s cases. Since 1984, the remains of 4 young women have been found here, each one nude, on her back, under a tree with her arms folded. Because they were placed within 1,000 feet of each other, a private investigator who has studied the scene many times thinks the killer created a walking path for himself to visually inspect his trophies one by one. Indeed, many police detectives and FBI agents are convinced that this is the personal graveyard of a vicious serial killer. At last, we have the 4 1990s murders, which we now know William Lewis Reese committed. He wasn't in the area in the 1970s or 1980s, so we have to have at least 2 serial killers, and police think they know the second killer's identity, Robert Abel. In the 60s, Abel was one of NASA's great young engineers, part of the team that was instrumental in designing the rocket that would put the Apollo astronauts into Earth's orbit. Robert Abel was part of the little band of very bright men who figured out how to get the maximum Saturn payload into orbit, which resulted in the first person landing on the moon. Today, however, a police detective suggests in a sworn affidavit that Abel is a serial sexual offender who displays the kind of rage and violent behavior that's often seen in serial killers. He is the prime suspect in the murders of the 4 women found in the oil field, which is next to the property he owns, and his name quickly surfaces whenever a teenager or a young woman disappears or is found dead in the area. Abel has maintained his innocence, and no evidence directly connecting him with the murders was ever uncovered. The officer later apologized to Abel for the harassment. There's one more suspect. In the 1990s, Edward Harold Bell was serving a 70-year sentence for murder. From his prison cell, he claimed that he killed 11 girls linked to the Texas killing fields. He referred to them as the 11 who went to heaven, and provided names of 4 of his reported victims, as well as details like hair color and the years he committed the crimes. Bell died in 2019, leaving behind little real evidence for authorities to confirm his story. DNA may have provided some insights, but it was impossible to recover it from some of the evidence which had been collected decades ago. Some have also speculated that Bell falsely confessed to gain attention and notoriety. Yet, as the Houston Chronicle reports, it's hard for investigators to ignore the detailed confession letter Bell left behind. That letter includes details that line up eerily well with the facts of some cases. Even if Bell committed those, there are other killings whose suspects could still be out there, hunting. Highway of Tears. The notorious stretch of highway runs across more than 700 kilometers of northern British Columbia. Anyone who drives along the highway for a significant time will come across a grim reminder of why this long paved road has one of the darkest histories in Canada. Bright yellow billboards standing like guards urge caution and warning of a killer on the loose. The warning sign says, "Girls don't hitchhike on the Highway of Tears." And above you can see the smiling faces of 3 women and girls who are believed to have gone missing or were found murdered around this highway. Delphine Nicol, Tamara Chipman, and Cecilia Nicol. The highway's nickname is derived from the fact that at least 18 women, the majority of them indigenous, have vanished or were found murdered along Highway 16 or the adjacent Highway 97 and Highway 5. Many are believed to have been hitchhiking. Family members and community advocates say the number of women is actually much higher, closer to 40. In the fall of 2005, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police task force called Project E-Pana was formed to look into the 1994 slayings of 3 15-year-old Indigenous girls found near Highway 16, whose cases may have been linked to a serial killer. The task force reviewed more than 200 unsolved cases of violence against women, some of them dating back to the 1960s. The deep search failed to yield a DNA link among cases pointing to a serial killer. 3 men have been convicted of killing multiple victims from towns in the area surrounding the Highway of Tears. Brian Peter Arp is serving a life sentence for the murder of 2 Prince George women. Edward Dennis Isaac was sentenced to life for 2 murders committed in the early 1980s. In 2014, Cody Legabokov was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life behind bars. However, none of these have been directly linked to the murders on the Highway of Tears. Authorities have recently been awarded new funding in their efforts to support families of currently missing women and girls and others affected by violence against women. May 5, 2022 is the National Day of Awareness for Missing or Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in Canada. Meanwhile, the Highway of Tears rolls on, a tragic and lasting symbol of a problem that stretches across the width and breadth of Canada and much of the world. Do you think these killers in these cases are still out there? Or have they finally met their maker? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and also subscribe to our channel for your regular dose of whodunits. See you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, and don't get any crazy ideas.